I am 97 years old. On the shelf beside my chair, next to a folded flag, there's a small glass jar of black sand. People see it when they visit. They assume it's something my grandkids picked up at a beach somewhere, a souvenir. Nobody asks about it. If they did, I wouldn't know how to answer, not honestly. That sand came from Iwo Jima. I scooped it into a ration tin on March 26, 1945, the day they declared the island secure. It's volcanic ash. It's also something else. 80 years later, I still can't hold that jar without smelling sulfur. I was a gunner inside an M4A3 Sherman tank. But it wasn't a regular Sherman. We didn't have a 75mm cannon. Where the main gun should have been, there was a nozzle, a flamethrower. One of 8 tanks secretly modified at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. Weapons nobody was supposed to know about until the moment we used them. So let me tell you exactly what those 8 tanks did. The Japanese had spent a year turning Iwo Jima into a fortress. General Kurabayashi, and I'll give the man his due, he was brilliant, had 21,000 men dug into 11 miles of interconnected tunnels that went 7 stories deep into volcanic rock. 5,000 caves, 1,500 fortified positions with concrete walls 4 feet thick, reinforced with steel, underground hospitals, communication centers buried 75 feet below ground, storage for a 2-month siege. Every inch of that island's surface could be swept by guns hidden behind steel doors that only opened to fire, then sealed shut. Our brass thought 74 consecutive days of bombing, 6,800 tons of explosives, plus 22,000 naval shells would flatten the place. They projected the island would fall in 5 days. They were catastrophically wrong. The bombardment destroyed less than 200 of those 1,500 positions. Most Japanese soldiers hadn't been scratched. Meanwhile, in a warehouse in Hawaii, a team led by Colonel Grunert was building something that had never existed before. 25 Seabees from the 117th Naval Construction Battalion, men from the 5th Marine Tank Battalion, the 43rd Chemical Laboratory Company, working 20-hour days, sleeping beside their welding equipment. 2 men, machinist mate Riker and electrician's mate Kissel, led the technical work. Their names never appeared in any headline. They saved more American lives than most generals. What they built was designated CBH-1, Construction Battalion, Hawaii 1. They took the best pieces of the British Ronson system, the Navy Mark I, and captured German flamethrower designs, and they created something new. Each conversion required 1,200 man-hours, 150 pounds of welding rod, 1,100 electrical connections, and 150 specially machined parts. The system operated at 300 pounds per square inch, triple the pressure of anything that came before. Maximum range, 150 yards with thickened fuel. The mixture burned at 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. full turret traverse of 270 degrees, aimed through the same periscope and controls as a regular cannon. And the most important part, from the outside, our tanks looked identical to standard Shermans. The Japanese couldn't tell what we were until the moment we fired. By then, there was no time left. We landed on D-Day, February 19th, 1945. Fifth wave. Navy orders kept us in reserve. We sat on the beach while 2,420 Marines were killed or wounded in the first 24 hours. The invasion had stalled. Conventional weapons couldn't penetrate bunkers buried under 10 feet of rock and concrete. Marines were dying by the hundreds trying to cross open ground against positions they couldn't see, couldn't destroy, couldn't flank. 700 yards from the beach in a full day. That wasn't progress, that was a funeral march. February 20th, D+1. The 21st Marines were pinned down at Motoyama Airfield No. 1. 3 concrete pillboxes with interlocking machine gun fire, creating a kill zone 200 yards wide. 2 rifle companies had already been decimated, 35% casualties in 48 hours. Lieutenant Colonel Duplantis made the call that changed everything. He called for us. Our tank, 431, under Staff Sergeant Meza, approached from an oblique angle, using wrecked aircraft for cover. To the Japanese watching through their gun slits, we were just another Sherman. At 125 yards, Meza gave the order. I remember his exact words: "Gunner, flamethrower, pillbox, fire." I pulled the trigger. The CBH-1 made a sound I will never forget, like the devil's own blowtorch, a mechanical hiss, and then a roar. A stream of napalm-thickened fuel arced through the air and struck the pillbox aperture dead center. The burning liquid poured through the machine gun port and flowed inside like lava. Temperatures hit 1,200 degrees in seconds. The oxygen was consumed so fast that men suffocated before the flames reached them. Those who survived the initial blast tried to flee through rear exits. Marine riflemen were waiting. I traversed the turret 30 degrees. The second pillbox, a 47mm anti-tank round, hit our frontal armor and ricocheted off. The tank shuddered. I held the trigger for 15 seconds. Black smoke poured from every opening. The third pillbox was behind a rocky outcropping. Meza ordered us in close, 80 yards. Japanese soldiers came out of spider holes, rushing us with satchel charges. Our bow gunner opened fire, but some reached the blind spot. That's when the full traverse capability saved us. I swung the turret 180 degrees and fired behind our own tank. The men rushing us disappeared in a wall of flame. Within 6 hours, all 8 tanks were in action. Tank 434 developed what we called corkscrew and burn, spiraling in to avoid anti-tank fire while maintaining continuous flame. Tank 432, near the base of Suribachi, fired a single demonstration shot into the air, and something happened that had never occurred in Japanese military history. Soldiers abandoned fortified positions. They ran rather than face burning alive. The first mass retreat from defensive positions ever recorded. Day 1 of flame tank combat. 47 fortified positions destroyed. Marine casualties in our sectors dropped 40%. 600 yards gained where the line hadn't moved in 2 days. On D+4, Hill 382, 7 stories of bunkers, the cornerstone of Kuribayashi's northern defense. The Japanese had adapted. They'd mounted 75mm mountain guns specifically to target us. They'd welded steel plates over bunker apertures. When we fired, the napalm splashed off sealed steel. For a moment, I thought they'd beaten us, but Corporal Rodriguez on Tank 434 noticed the plates glowing cherry red. He held the trigger for 45 seconds, far beyond doctrine, until the steel buckled and the flame poured through the gaps. Ammunition cooked off. Concrete cracked from thermal shock. That same day, Corporal Herschel Woody Williams went where our tanks couldn't, a narrow ravine called the amphitheater. He advanced on foot, 70-pound flamethrower on his back, covered by 4 riflemen. 2 of those riflemen died protecting him. In 4 hours, Williams destroyed 7 pillboxes. He earned the Medal of Honor. He was the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from Iwo Jima when he died in June 2022, age 98. Tank 436 made what we call the impossible shot. A cliff face the Japanese thought was immune to flamethrowers. Sergeant Foster tilted the entire tank backward on a pile of rubble and fired at maximum elevation. The napalm arced up, hung in the air, and cascaded down into their positions from above. Witnesses saw Japanese soldiers leap from the cliffs rather than burn. The black sand got into everything, every seal, every hatch, every crevice of the tank. That same sand is in the jar on my shelf. The battle lasted 36 days, not 5. 26,000 American casualties, 6,821 killed. Of 21,000 Japanese defenders, 216 survived. Our 8 tanks destroyed over 1,000 fortified positions. We consumed 360,000 gallons of fuel mixture. Post-action analysis estimated we prevented 5,000 American casualties. Each flame tank, statistically, saved 625 men. Tank 438 was destroyed on March 11th when a Japanese soldier detonated himself against the engine compartment. 3 of the 5 crew died. Maintenance crews needed blowtorches to remove human remains fused to our tracks. Corporal Carlson from our crew said it plainly. You could hear them screaming when the flame hit, not for long, but you heard it. Sometimes at night, I still hear it. We came home and said nothing. The Seabees who built the weapons, Riker and Kissel, went back to civilian life. Nobody knew their names. Colonel Grunert's reports stayed classified for 30 years. We held reunions at Schofield Barracks every year for decades, just the tank crews, no reporters. Men sharing things too terrible for anyone else to understand. The last reunion was held on the 70th anniversary. Only 3 of us were there, all in our 90s. My wife found the ration tin in a footlocker in 1968. She put the sand in that glass jar and set it on the shelf. She thought it was sentimental. I never corrected her. I never told her what was mixed in with the volcanic ash. In 1985, I went back to Iwo Jima for a reconciliation ceremony. I stood with a former Japanese officer named Yamada, the same man who'd watched our tank fire for the first time on February 20th. He'd survived the battle as one of the 216 prisoners. He told me through an interpreter, "War makes monsters of us all. You did what you had to do, as did we." I told him the truth. We were all just boys trying to survive. General Kurebayashi, in his final message before he died, wrote something I've thought about every day since. The Americans have not defeated us with superior numbers. They have defeated us with superior imagination. He was right. 8 tanks, built by Seabees in a warehouse. That's what broke the deadlock at Iwo Jima, not the 22,000 naval shells, not the 6,800 tons of bombs. 8 modified Shermans that could pour liquid fire at 150 yards. Corporal Vitelli, who gunned on Tank 436, said it best. Pride isn't the right word. We did a terrible job that had to be done. Those tanks saved Marine lives. That's enough. I pick up the jar sometimes. The sand shifts inside the glass, still black after 80 years. People ask me if I'm proud. I tell them what Sergeant Mesa told his grandson before he died. Nobody should be proud of burning men alive. But those tanks saved a lot of Marine lives. That's what I try to remember. I am 97 years old, and this jar of black sand is the only proof I have that any of it happened.